All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Dr. Mandy, and I am here with Kitty Martone, and she is the Healthy Gut Girl. You can find her on Instagram. That's how we found each other. And she is also involved in social outreach and marketing for, I know you all want to know about hormones. So here we are, Onus Natural Plant-Based Hormone Support. So we are here to talk about the hormones because I know that is a big topic of conversation for everybody with bladder pain. There is definitely a link. You guys know I talk a lot about copper toxicity, estrogen dominance, hormone deficiency, which is happening with younger and younger people. I guess there's endocrine disrupting chemicals that interfere with that. Nutrient deficiencies are a big part of that. But we want to know how we can support it naturally without having to resort to synthetic hormones is really what we want to do. So we're going to talk about things like, perimenopause, yay, fun stuff. Postmenopause, estrogen dominance, symptoms to look out for. Progesterone, that's a hot topic. Some problems that can happen when you start progesterone, which I just learned about. And we're going to dive into the product line today. So I'm happy to have her here. Hi, Kitty.
Hi.
So can you introduce yourself a little bit and talk about how you got into this first?
Sure. Um, let's see, I'm Kitty Martone, and I started out really like a lot of, I think, health practitioners in the field where I had my own issues. And a lot of my stuff was from birth, just a lot of health issues, a lot of ear, nose, and throat, gut. And then when I reached puberty, it just blossomed into this rat's nest of hormonal imbalance. And so I pursued natural remedies because I was on, medications my whole young life, and it was getting me nowhere. In fact, worse. And so I went down the gut health route, and that was fantastic. I was able to bring so much balance to so many of the different autoimmune conditions and different things that I was battling with. But I was still dealing with really heavy, heavy, heavy periods, debilitating cycles, and infertility. Well, I would get pregnant, but I couldn't stay pregnant. So I would always miscarry at 5 to 6 weeks over and over and over. So I thought, what the gut's not curing this one. What's wrong? And I went down this deep, deep dive rabbit hole of progesterone and bioidentical hormones, and was also being met with a lot of resistance with doctors who were constantly trying to put me back on the birth control pill, give me a Mirena IUD, give me just you name it. And it was really creating, just worsening my symptoms. So I knew something was not right. And I fell upon the progesteronetherapy.com website, which I recommend to everyone. Ray White was the owner of that. And she also is the owner of NatPro, the product NatPro. And it was all about progesterone therapy and how, what we're really up against here is estrogen dominance. And this doesn't just include, and not to demonize the hormone estrogen, estrogen is essential, but it was the xenoestrogen component as well, right? The estrogen mimickers. So I went down that rabbit hole and said, wow, I've got a serious issue with estrogen dominance and xenoestrogens and toxicity. I need to increase my progesterone. And this was really unusual to have these mega doses. No one was hearing about mega dosing progesterone at the time, and barely even now it's coming into light. And I went down that road, and I just had such incredible success right away. Incredible things happened in my life. And then within about 6 to 8 months, I was totally symptom free and was at mega doses, and was fantastic for a year. And then I started to dose down. And that's it. So I decided I'm going to start a Facebook group, and I'm going to start letting women know about this gut health and hormones, gut health and progesterone therapy. And that's been my plight now. I mean, in fact, today we reached 50,000 members in that group, the estrogen dominant support group. And it's all about progesterone therapy and managing estrogen, balancing estrogen and gut health. So that's me.
That's awesome. It's always good to hear somebody's story, right? Because that's, what gets us into what we're doing.
Yeah.
Um, So that makes me wonder, question I have, is when you found out you had estrogen dominance, was there a test that you did, or was it just from symptoms that you were basing on? Because sometimes the tests are not, I feel like sometimes the tests don't really show that. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Well, back then, so we're talking about 12 years ago. Um, yeah, I'm 54 now. I'm just freshly in menopause. So that was, yeah, that was like I was 42. And the at that point they didn't care because of my age, so they were like, it's normal for you to have these problems because you're coming into perimenopause, so they didn't really want to test me. I went through like 7 doctors. I finally did get a few blood labs that did show I had extremely high estrogen, but it was really obvious because I mean I was one of these people that showed the estrogen. I had really big boobs, and they were always tender and painful. I had, cystic breasts as well. I had swollen lymph. I had heavy clotty periods. So it was really obvious that my symptoms that I was dealing with high estrogen, where I know there's a lot of women who might show that they have normal estrogen, but then they're having these other types of symptoms, and it's hard to guess for some women. But yeah, so that's basically how I knew, was just
Yeah, because I will be honest, like when I do testing, like either blood or Dutch, I see a lot of actually low estrogen, but then I know that it doesn't matter. It's not about the levels, it's about the ratio of estrogen to progesterone. That's the problem. Because that's why in
absolutely.
menopause, you estrogen does come down, but if you still have that imbalance, you're still going to have the symptoms. So that's why I was asked.
Hmm.
So, okay, just symptoms of estrogen dominance. Okay, so you just talked about. So what are the symptoms that people should look out for? You mentioned some of them. Any others?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I actually am writing them out now for a course I'm going to be doing soon. And I'm like, there's pages and pages, but the obvious ones I would say would be like heavy periods, painful periods, uh um sorry, migraines, swollen breasts, tender breasts, depression, insomnia, belly fat gain that's really hard to lose no matter what you do, um, endometriosis, fibroids, polyps, cystic breasts, any kind of masses and tissue overgrowth. So thickening of the uterine lining. So, we know that estrogen is mitogenic, right? So it causes cells to divide and grow. So that's what it does. And that's a good thing. It's like growing a fetus, strengthening bone. It's a good thing, but it's modulated or regulated by progesterone. So when that progesterone is not there, you don't have enough of it to modulate that or oppose that estrogen, it can grow things it shouldn't grow. And so that's what I look out for too. Even strange things like I used to bite the inside of my cheek. Like I would bite it once and continue to bite it, bite it, bite it. And I never thought for one moment that that had anything to do with estrogen dominance, but indeed it did. It was growing the tissue of the inside of my cheeks. So there's some strange things, heightening of allergies and food sensitivities, and people think it's seasonal, even though it might happen during a seasonal change. It can be worsened by estrogen dominance. Um, Bleeding all month, bleeding in between periods. Like there's so many symptoms, but those are the pretty obvious ones besides the cheek biting.
Yeah, and then that brings me to the copper that, we talked about last time. I think that's a big contributor to this copper toxicity. So it's almost like I'm going even more upstream because I have to address the copper toxicity because I see it when I do the HTMA and then I do the blood labs to confirm it. And now going upstream, it's like, okay, the estrogen dominance is probably the root cause of that. And we know it is. Usually it's birth control. People have been on birth control for a long time. And those are usually what I see. But then there's people who haven't been and they still have it. So that brings me to the next question. What are the main causes of estrogen dominance? You said
Mm.
xenoestrogens. Let's dive into that a little bit.
Oh man, it's probably the dark horse here for sure. I think that a lot of, especially doctors, medical doctors, do not even talk about that. And I think the reason is maybe partially that they don't know enough about it. But I think the other reason is what the heck are we supposed to do about it? Because they don't know. And and there are ways to help clear your system from xenoestrogens, but that's a topic for another day. But they can't really be tested in a hormone lab because even though they mimic estrogen, they don't present as estrogen. So we can't go, oh, this is a high level of estrogen that is definitely not your body identical estrogen. It's a xenoestrogen. There's no way to do that. There are expensive labs to test for xenoestrogens, but then they come in different forms. They come in the form of pesticides and chemicals and things that you touch and things that you smell and pollution and beauty chemicals. So there's not just like one thing called a xenoestrogen, right? It's an umbrella, and under that is like a lot of other things. So it's a daunting task to take on, I think, for a medical doctor. So I don't fault them at all, but we do need to acknowledge that, and this includes birth control, medicated birth control, that it is a xenoestrogen. Even, progestin does not behave like progesterone very much, but its behavior allows estrogen to then dominate, right? So yeah, that you made a very good point earlier that I'll reiterate, which is that the ratio is what's important because I was in almost in menopause. In fact, I had already been not bleeding for a year, and my levels of estrogen were still dominating over my progesterone, even though they were almost undetectable. They were so low, but I still had more estrogen, enough estrogen to cause problems. And I wasn't doing healthy things with that estrogen at my liver and at my bowel. So yeah, so the xenoestrogen component is a dark horse, and it's something we need to be proactive with in our own household and with the things we use and try to minimize our exposure. And the good news is that once you start to take those actions, it doesn't take long for us to start to excrete um, certain xenoestrogens like glyphosate and pesticides, things like that. It doesn't take long. I think it's something like 10 days before you can noticeably see a change in urine levels of glyphosate, for one. So that's good news. So it's not too daunting, but we do have to start to get rid of them in our environment.
Yeah, that's going to be a bigger issue, I think, from a policy standpoint for our nation.
Yes.
Actually.
Amen.
It is everywhere. And I used to do glyphosate testing. I haven't as much anymore because everyone had them. So I was like, why waste the money where I could run other labs? I know you have glyphosate. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like I used to, when I used to do it, I saw always everyone had high levels, including myself. And I try to avoid things that have it. So it's almost like ubiquitous. You can't avoid it. And that's a
Mm.
policy issue, 100%. I'm very, very shocked that we still allow that into our food system, considering other parts of the world have not.
Hmm.
Laugh at us
Hmm.
because we don't have it in they don't have it, but we still use it. And so it's just really sad. And you make a really good point about the liver and the bowel, because that is part of detoxification of, glucuronidation is a big pathway of getting rid of this toxic estrogen. And a lot of people, because of the gut bacteria, and they have dysbiosis, they're not doing glucuronidation properly. And so they need extra support. So we do the calcium deglucarate for those people, that helps support that. But yeah, you have to have, this boils back down to the gut, which is why you're the gut healthy girl, healthy gut girl, because I feel like that if your gut's unhealthy, then you're going to have other problems with the process of detoxification. And then you start to accumulate those estrogens as well. So that's super important. So, now, as far as perimenopause, can you talk a little bit about what's going on? Because I find it really fascinating that when I got my hormones tested too before we conceived, I was obviously in peri. I'm pretty sure I was because I had some mild symptoms of it. But also my estrogen levels were really high compared to like when I had done the Dutch test prior, a long time prior. And so it made me realize, oh, I think estrogen levels do actually skyrocket during perimenopause. Is this correct?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. You know what? Dr. Carrie Jones did this really, really great video about perimenopause, and she said she likens it to an almost empty bottle of ketchup, like the squeezable ones, where you go to squeeze some ketchup out and like you get nothing. You just get this like, scanty, and or you do it and all of a sudden you get this massive amounts of ketchup out. And that's perimenopause. It's like it just depends on the day. It depends on the month. It depends on how close you are to, the end of the of bleeding. And So, but I would say that naturally, like our body clock and our bodies naturally know to try to do everything they can to create a fertile environment. And that means high estrogen, high progesterone, high testosterone imbalance. And so it's just gathering all its resources to give it one last shot before it's done, to have a baby, because that's the goal, isn't it? So yeah, so I think that sometimes it can mean very, very high levels of estrogen. Certainly meant that for me. Oh my gosh, I think I bled my entire perimenopausal era was just bleeding. It was awful. Yeah.
Yeah, so then it's fluctuating, and that's probably explains a lot of the symptoms that come and go. That makes a lot of
Hmm.
sense. Okay. So that's if you're listening and you're going through this perimenopause, then you may check test one day and your hormones could be super high, then you can test another day and they can be low, and there's just this fluctuation because you're right, it's probably
Yeah.
approaching the end. It's kind of like the end of life, right? Things
Hmm.
do change as that has happening. Okay, so let's dive into now progesterone. So tell me a bit about the different kinds of progesterone therapy that are out there. I've seen creams from yams. I've seen bioidentical patches. I've seen, pills. What are the different options people have for progesterone?
Yeah. So when it comes to bioidentical progesterone, it is made from micronized, so from a powder that is created in a lab from one of a few vegetables, which is wild yam. Will you shut this door for me? Okay. Um, so micronized progesterone is synthesized in a lab from a few different vegetables. There's wild yam, soy, and a type of cactus, I believe, that is not used as frequently. And it's basically there's a plant sterol in it that they extract, and from that called diosgenin, and from that they actually make the progesterone powder from that. So it is a synthesized process from a natural plant. So it isn't 100% like, where wild yam creams that don't say progesterone on the label, those wild yam creams are an extract of wild yam and they don't have progesterone in it. And the body can't convert that wild yam into progesterone. That wild yam in nature, in and of itself, is an adaptogen and it acts like any other adaptogen. It does not convert to progesterone. It helps to achieve homeostasis in the hormones, right? As adaptogens do. But when we convert that plant sterol into micronized progesterone, and then we use that powder, we can make anything. You can make lozenges, you can make injections, you can make creams, oils, just as you mentioned. Prometrium is a prescription oral form of progesterone. They make that from micronized. So it's all basically from the same compound. And you can turn it into any number of things. You can also keep it really, really clean, like Ona's does. And there's a handful of others that keep it very, very clean. And then you can also add a bunch of garbage to it, which a lot of people do with preservatives and, all these different types of things to keep it creamy and all these things. So we try to look for clean versions of progesterone. And then right now there's a big discussion about topical versus oral, because topical will do something different in the body versus when you ingest it. And it's funny because there's a sublingual oral, and then there is like you can swallow a pill, and that ends up going through the digestive process, and that does something different too. So those are three different variables: the exogenous absorption, the digestive absorption, if you will, and then the sublingual absorption. And then on top of that, it depends on your individual body, the variables, like how well you're going to absorb topical versus if you've got gut issues. Like, you'll hear someone like Mercola who's like, definitely do an oral. But for some people, they don't have the capacity gut health wise to even absorb well at the gut. And then there's topical. Some people have hypothyroid, which causes a little less absorption at the skin level. Some people have candida. That's going to hinder things. Some people have less hormone receptors. A lot. If you've been on birth control for a very long time, which I call medicated menopause, it's going to down regulate your progesterone receptors because progestin, the synthetic version, has come in and decided to take control, and it's hijacked your communication between your pituitary and your ovaries, and your progesterone's taken a back seat. So your progesterone receptors are going to down regulate. And I was on the birth control pill for so long. And so that's why mega doses were necessary for me, not because I'm going to use that much progesterone in a day. It's impossible, but because I didn't have enough receptor sites. So there are a bunch of variables with progesterone when it comes to progesterone. And that's why my efforts are really in educating, because you can't just go, hey, I'm going to take this. Great. Everyone else is, so I'm going to do it. It's not that easy. It's not like an aspirin.
So, um, when you talked about prometrium, is that coming from the same source of the of onus?
Yeah, basically it's the same micronized progesterone form. They have to make that progesterone. I mean, the compound, once they add it to the pill, can be a lot of different things. But ultimately, bioidentical progesterone comes from a plant sterol and is turned into then a powder, which is then turned into a compound mixed with other things. A carrier oil, usually, because progesterone's lipophilic and it likes fat. So it usually they'll mix it with like a vitamin E or coconut oil or something like that. So that's why prometrium, and there's other names for prometrium. I think utrogestin is the UK version, and there's some other forms, but that is usually peanut oil because it's a very good carrier oil for progesterone when you ingest it. And I really like it. I like prometrium because in the gut, it's going to go through the liver and it's going to make allopregnanolone, which is really good for sleep, really good for postnatal depression. It's really good for the brain, really good for calming, makes a lot of women dizzy but that's one of the benefits of oral. But the peanut oil, not so much. It's not the greatest, as you know,
It's
to
a
use.
yeah, it's just a pretty small dose, I bet though.
Very, very
Yeah,
small.
yeah,
Yeah.
dose dependent. All right. So, is there an age limit on, can someone in their 70s get benefit from it?
From progesterone in general, absolutely. And this might be, I don't know, you might want to edit this out or not. I'll leave it up to you. But all animals, all mammals make and need progesterone, including infants. Now, I'm not saying to go out and dose your infant with progesterone, but you can be born estrogen dominant. You can be born with a xenoestrogen load, and this can make you progesterone deficient. And so we've seen, I mean, even things like cradle cap, colic, thrush, baby menses, baby lactation, baby depression, all of these things can be linked to estrogen dominance. And so if mom's estrogen dominant and has a xenoestrogen load, absolutely babies can be born. And they can also have, adrenaline dominance. This can also lead to this sort of uh, leaning towards being adrenaline dominant, cortisol dominant, and cortisol dysregulation. And so, bedwetting, temper tantrums, spectrum disorders. We have seen in my practice with my husband, who's a chiropractor who works with children with disabilities, we have seen progesterone work with children for, night terrors, bedwetting, it's incredible. And of course, you would do it with a knowledgeable practitioner. But I mean, I've used progesterone on my dog who had incontinence. My girlfriend used it on her broody chickens. It's pretty fabulous and really essential. But again, you're going to want to do that with guidance.
Yeah, it makes me think about my own daughter because I'm pretty sure she had that. And we did do the hair test on her and she had massive copper toxicity. It was off the charts. The
Mm,
only reason I did it was because she had such bad anxiety. And I'm like, something's going on here. This is just not normal. And she had some of the other things you just mentioned. So she had the night terrors. She had a lot of phobias, a lot of fears. I was definitely concerned about her. And then when I did the hair and so we started, taking the minerals and stuff, it really helped a lot. But she does still have the heavy periods, so and they're painful. So I'm almost
mm.
wondering. So with these, with teenagers, for example, would it be more like us? Would you recommend like topical for that? Is that easier? Probably a better option than.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, either one really, because like the oils are nice and easy. It's just a drop, but kids tend to, especially if they're ever been in the spectrum in any way, like I was, the taste is a big deal. And usually vitamin E is not a flavorful
Yeah,
flavor,
yeah.
flavorful flavor. But yeah, so creams can be really easy. But I want to preface all that with saying, and I'm not saying this to you because I know what you do for a living and really respect and love all the work you do. So this isn't the knowledge for you. This is for the listeners, which is with children, it's always best to work on nutrient dense foods, boost their metabolism. I would check thyroid long before I'd check hormones in a child. Well, thyroid is a hormone, but sex hormones. And, make sure they're getting vitamins A, B, C, D, E, K, magnesium, ideally through their food sources, just those foods that they have an aversion to are usually the foods that they so desperately need. And once you boost up that metabolism and you get those nutrients in, they'll start making hormones again in balance and they'll start detoxing that toxic estrogen out of the liver. I mean, barring they don't have the MTHFR and they don't have different SNPs that might be preventing toxicity from being excreted normally, you can support that as well. But I've seen wonderful things happen when there is progesterone added to teenagers. And even preteens before puberty. It's not, and it doesn't mess up their cycles. It doesn't thwart ovulation. Yes, if you take it at high doses, it can. But with these young kids, they don't need much at all. It's tiny, tiny amounts. We're talking about 25 milligrams maybe. And you mentioned a 70-year-old. Yeah, the hormones are the fountain of youth. And there are healthy women who are aged who are still making hormones. Yeah, they're not 25-year-olds levels, but they are still making adequate hormones. And when you are not making hormones anymore, they're undetectable, that's when we have accelerated aging. That's when we have DNA damage. That's when we have all of these things that really increase aging.
Yeah, I was thinking about my mom with that one. You mentioned sleep, and I'm like, she just does not sleep. And so I thought,
Mm-hmm.
we tried so many things. Now, my daughter did really well on the mineral supplement that, we customized the Vicon with the hair. What changes we saw with her? You're right. They're very, very, their plasticity is really good with kids. They adapt very quickly. And so all the anxiety went away. I think a lot of her symptoms really improved. But my mom, she's just really struggling with sleep. And so I thought, maybe I could get her this.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, talk
absolutely.
about what to expect when you start. The last time we talked, you mentioned that there are some downsides to the initial. I think it was a lot of that was because you were moving estrogen, and so there's this period of adjustment. Can you talk about that?
Hmm. Yeah, we called it in my group, we named it estrogen kickback. And pharmacist Carol Peterson, who is an absolute expert and hero when it comes to progesterone and women's hormones and advocate for women's health and hormones, she loved that description. And basically, the scientific uh, words for it would be stimulating estrogen receptors. And it happens often. It happens when you take birth control pill. Happens when you eat flax. It happens when you eat soy. You're stimulating, and I liken it to like two magnets, like progesterone and estrogen, and they're coming close together, and they don't even have to touch yet. But progesterone shows up, and estrogen starts to get stimulated from that. And that can cause, it's not making more estrogen, which is a fallacy. It's actually just stimulating the existing estrogen. And that can create estrogenic symptoms or worsening of the ones you already have. And when we see it the most is when people first start out with taking progesterone, bioidentical progesterone. It stimulates the estrogen. And then they all of a sudden start bleeding more, or they start having more migraines, or they get a new symptom and they say, it's not for me. The progesterone, I didn't do well with it. I'm allergic to it. It's not good. It did the opposite of what it was supposed to do. When in actuality, we have such high levels of xenoestrogens that, again, we can't even see in blood labs for hormones. So it's stimulating that as well, because they're sitting in the estrogen receptors, these mimickers. And so we're getting that happening. And then we're also getting our own body identical, the progesterone, the estrogen that you're making, starting to do its thing. So it's almost like a tug of war. And the biggest problem, I would say, when we see that the most is when women are underdosing for their needs. And so that can mean that for me, I needed, upwards of 400 milligrams when I started, but I was taking 125 according to what the doctors were saying and, on the internet and whatnot. So they were saying 75 milligrams, 125 milligrams maximum at that time. That was making me bonkers. I was having suicidal ideation. I was having like psychotic moments. I was bleeding more. Things were just getting worse on those low doses. So I kept raising the dose until I was symptom free. And that took about 3 weeks to start to really see. Well, I should say I immediately stopped bleeding when I reached about, I think it was 200 milligrams, I stopped bleeding. And then after that, the higher the dose, the more the symptoms would go away. The existing symptoms and then the estrogen kickback would stop. And so that's usually what happens. And it's peculiar because it's definitely like, what's happening to me? I must be allergic to progesterone. I can't sleep all of a sudden. A big one is weight gain. There's two types of weight gain with progesterone. One is water weight. That's really common because it's a diuretic and your body needs to get used to that much progesterone and say, oh, okay, now I've got the progesterone I need. And then you'll shed that water weight. Some women, it takes 6 weeks. Some women, it takes 3 months. It seems to be the magic number for a lot of things in life is a 3-month mark where the body goes, okay, I get it now. I've got the tools I need. I don't need to be in emergency mode and hoarding my progesterone. And okay. And all of a sudden you start to level out. And a lot of women will lose that weight. But then some women will start to get like belly fat and blubbery fat, right? And this is insulin resistance. And it's got nothing to do with progesterone. It's the progesterone revealing that you have an underlying issue with blood sugar regulation. And so in a way, it's kind of a blessing. I know women are probably like, shut up. It's a blessing to know that that's happening because if that didn't show up now, it's going to show up at some point. It's a red light on your dashboard saying you are prone to insulin resistance. You are not metabolizing your glucose well at the liver. So you need to address these root causes. And progesterone just shined a light on it. But people are like, nope, it made me gain weight. It made me gain weight. It's impossible. Progesterone's action, it's chemically, scientifically impossible that progesterone can make you gain weight. But it can stimulate estrogen. And we know estrogen can make you gain weight. And we know that that it can also reveal these other imbalances. So it's a bummer when that happens. And sometimes women do really well with just raising the dose. But my advice is to address that blood sugar dysregulation that you have going on.
That's amazing. Wow. Yeah, that's a lot to think about.
I know it's a lot.
I'm like, weight gain, yay. I'll tell
Yeah.
you what though, when I run the Nutri-Eval test, I definitely see blood sugar dysregulation 1,000 times. I mean, so many times. And a lot of that is boiling down to the Krebs cycle. The Krebs cycle is not
Mm.
working properly. Toxicity does play a role in that for sure, because these are enzymes. Enzymes are very sensitive to toxins. But a lot of those enzymes have cofactors, and their cofactors are nutritional. And so when I see the plethora of magnesium deficiency and B
Ugh.
vitamins and those dose therapeutically, it's interesting when you said therapeutic dosing is different than the RDA. The RDA is really dumb allowances. That's why we call it really dumb allowances, RDA.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, that's what we call it in our world, because they're just the minimum you need to not die. But
Right.
you're not going to get therapeutic dosing from that. And so when we compound our formulas, they're therapeutic doses. I mean, you're looking at like between 500 and 800 milligrams of magnesium, for
Yeah,
example. And because
sure.
you mentioned saturation, you mentioned like sometimes your receptors are not working. Well, it's the same thing with enzymes. Enzymes have to be super saturated sometimes with their cofactor to activate them because if the enzyme's been dead for a while and hasn't been doing its job, it hasn't had its cofactor, it needs super saturation. And we do that with these higher doses. There, you don't have to be on it forever. But as long as you're eating processed foods though, and you're depleting things like magnesium and you're drinking loads of alcohol, and we talked about alcohol last time, and you're depleting
Mm,
your Bs, especially B1, then you are going to have to stay on those higher doses. But there's no way around the lifestyle though. You cannot out supplement the lifestyle. So if you want to drink
no.
alcohol, and get plastered every weekend, then you're just going to deal with the consequences of that. That's just kind of my thing.
It's
Um,
expensive. It's an expensive
mhm,
habit in more ways than just money. It's
yeah,
expensive with, how much it uses progesterone and spends magnesium and all the things. Yeah.
in your
Yeah.
liver.
Yeah.
Affects the liver, and that's the big thing. I mean, we're talking about detoxification here. We're talking about estrogen. We're talking about, the liver and its ability to process, blood sugar, I mean, glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, all these things. You need a healthy liver. And so, I mean, yeah, I mean, I see it so much with people that they're like pretty much tipping on this like pre-diabetes state, and they're only in their 30s and they're like pre-diabetic already. And it's like, how's
Yeah.
that happening? You're not supposed to be pre-diabetic until you're in your 70s.
Hmm.
So that's why very interesting things to unpack, and it makes me think about strategy, with this, start them on balancing the blood sugar through diet and lifestyle and supplementation, and then maybe bring the progesterone on after that's been
Absolutely.
done, so you have less likely of having the side effects, because those side effects, I'm sorry to say it, but those are pretty significant side effects. I
Yeah.
don't know about that belly fat stuff. I'm not sure how I feel about that. So,
Exactly. Yeah.
you
I get
know.
it. And I mean, a lot of women have also lost a lot of weight and found that they were able to lose weight on progesterone. It's definitely not a huge percentage of women that do the weight gain, but it's there. And it's, I'm not gonna, I'll be transparent about all of that. And so it's a matter of finding that happy dose. But I always say progesterone is not a magic bullet. Absolutely not. Like you need to be doing the homework with all the other things. And I think that was one of the reasons I had such a good experience with progesterone, and a lot of women do, is because I was already a healthy gut girl at that point. I had done all this work on my gut, and so I had these things kind of in order, but I still struggled. So, it took me a while to be able to come down from, I mean, I ended up at 800 milligrams, which is very expensive, and that was a 3% cream, so that's a lot of cream in a day. I was definitely sticky all day. And but it was magic for me. It was fantastic and changed my life, really. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too late for me to correct the miscarrying issue. I'm sure had I just found it even 2 years earlier, I would have been able to fix it. But it was a little too late.
I understand.
Mhm.
So it's funny because with Zeo charge that a lot of my patients are using, it's the same idea. If their dose is too low, they have really bad side effects because they're recirculating the toxins. So we have to
Mm.
saturate the system so we can saturate all that's in the system so that we can act. And there's been people like, I mean, the average dose is 2 scoops, but I've had people who had to take 12 scoops in order to get them out of that Herx reaction that they were having.
Wow.
12, which is a lot. And it's not permanent. You start high and then you work your way down. Same concept. It's almost like too low of a dose can create more problems. You have to increase the
Yeah.
dose. And I always
I
tell people,
like
yeah.
I like that word saturation. I've used it in the past, and I need to start using it more because people have this misconception that the balance between progesterone and estrogen is just is in isolation. That's like all it does. They need to just be in balance together. Even doctors do this where they look at your lab and they go, oh, progesterone, estrogen. But estrogen has one job, is to grow things. That's it. It's to grow things. And estrogen, I mean, progesterone has so many, it donates to help make estrogen. It donates to make testosterone, cortisol. It has a lot of different functions and actions in the body. It can be catabolic. It does so many things. And so the saturation concept is brilliant because it's like, yes, we need all of that progesterone to not just do the sex hormone job, of balancing estrogen, but it's needed for all these other things. So taking just enough, that's why when a woman is pregnant and a doctor says, oh, you only need progesterone in the first trimester. Yeah, the baby only needs progesterone in the first trimester, but what about me, bro? Like, my brain, my spine, all the estrogen I have in my breasts and in my head and my all the spinal cord, it needs to be the the estrogen needs to be opposed at all times in my body, in the body of the fetus, in the all of it. So it's overlooked. It's a misconception about progesterone needing to be, delicately managed. No, I mean, saturate that, megadose that for your needs, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a different concept for sure. I think people are afraid though, because it's like, oh, I'm taking
For
so
sure.
much, besides the cost, I think they're just afraid. I think we're automatically programmed that if I'm having a side effect, that means I need to stop. And I was like, no, the side effect is your body's way of communicating, saying, this is good. I'm making changes because I'd rather see you have negative side effects than have none. Because if you had
Hmm.
nothing and you didn't get better or you didn't get worse, I'd be more concerned than if you got worse. Being worse, getting worse
Yeah,
can give me feedback as that there's definitely an underlying problem. So,
right.
so the next and last question for you is your product line. Can you do you have the ability or the to kind of dive into the product line, the onus, and maybe share screens and maybe kind of walk through some of your favorites?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so when one of the amazing things, and I mentioned this to you in the past, that Ona, when she was alive, she had catamenial epilepsy, and she had a lot of health issues just from congenital issues growing up in life, and the catamenial epilepsy she had discovered from a doctor that if she took progesterone, it could potentially help manage her seizures. Catamenial epilepsy is a hormonally driven form of epilepsy. And so she started to take the progesterone and realized that actually sometimes it even stimulated a seizure. And so she said, I wonder if it's because the dose is too low. So she started taking higher and higher doses until she realized, wow, I can actually control the seizures almost entirely with high dose progesterone. And so she did that. And then but the problem was she couldn't access that much progesterone. And then she went, and her husband, who is a bit of a chemist, went into this whole deep dive of how can we make it ourselves and let's learn about progesterone. Sure enough, turns out progesterone is not a regulated substance in the US, neither is estrogen, and that it doesn't need to be made by a doctor in a pharmacy, etc. And so, and they came upon Dr. Ray Peat's patent. Dr. Ray Peat, brilliant pro-metabolic researcher and advocate for women's hormones, brilliant man. He created a patent where he made up to 30%. So prometrium and compounded progesterone products are usually 2%, sometimes 3%. Over the counter products like Nat Pro are usually 3%. Rarely, I think Dr. Platt does a 5%. I think he's the only one that did higher strengths. Well, this patent was like, hey, once the patent expired, it became public domain. And so Dr. Ray Peat said, hey, let's do this. He's going to do this on purpose and let everyone have access to making this if they wanted to. So up to 30%. The problem is the higher the strengths, the harder it is to absorb. For some reason, I don't know that anybody really knows why yet. I know making it is difficult to keep it in solution. So Ona's makes up to 20%. So they make a 3%, a 5%, a 10%, and a 20%. It's very concentrated. One pump has 200 milligrams in it. So very, very concentrated. I just lost you that. Okay.
Oh yeah,
There
here
we
we
go.
go.
Yeah.
So I'm sharing screen. So
Great.
is this what you mean? Is this you mean 3, 5, 10, 20?
Exactly.
Got
And
it.
so the
And
Luna
what is the
Snow
20? Yeah.
that's a 10% oral oil, and that's a
Wow.
fairly new product that's doing really, really well. It's uh you can take it orally or you can do it transdermally as well.
It's
And
sublingual for this one.
yeah, then there's that's the only one that's, well, there's one more that's oral. There's a 3% that's, I'm sorry, a 5% that's actually, I think it's down further. a 5% that's actually, there it is on the left, that's actually spearmint. And that I developed that one because of the flavor of any oral progesterone is so gross to me. And that has spearmint in it, and it's nice. A very, very, very tiny amount of spearmint. So it's not going to affect your testosterone levels. It's such a tiny amount. I think there's probably 10 mil in the entire bottle. And but it's just enough to cut through that vitamin E flavor, the oil flavor, which is wheat germ, which is not yummy at all.
Well,
And
I like how you put the dosage here. One drop contains 2.5, 1 ml has 50. And so like when you were doing 400 at one point, you were taking 8 times of that, I guess.
yeah, but
Right.
that was I was using a cream at that time. I was
Oh,
using a
cream.
3% cream, yeah.
Oh, I got
But I wasn't using Ona's because Ona's wasn't around yet. That one, yeah.
you.
And
Okay, this
that's
is the way.
formulated to be like Nat Pro. This one's very similar to the 3% I was using. And this one is pretty really absorbable. But if you are doing more than 400 milligrams a day, you're going to be at a lot of cream. You're going to be using a lot of cream.
Yeah, it says 1 ml
And
contains 30 milligrams. So 1/4, it's a teaspoon is 38 milligrams of progesterone. So
yeah,
it's either so when you're measuring this out, because this is obviously is a cream, how would they measure 1 ml, or would they be using this teaspoon dose instead?
one pump of the 3% is 30 milligrams.
Oh, one
So
pump.
1 mil
Okay,
is one pump. Yeah.
got it. 1 ml is one pump. Okay, good to know. Okay,
Yeah.
wow, this is really cool. What else is on here that we should know about?
Yeah. There's
T-boost?
the
What's T-boost?
T-boost is a DHEA.
Oh,
And these were here before I came along.
okay.
I think I would have a lower dosing for the DHEA if it were up to me. The 100 mil, I think, is a lot to start with for people. Yeah, so 30 milligrams. I think I would do just a little bit less than that, but it's a pump, so you can use it as much as you want, but it's good.
So one
DHEA
mil
is,
was one pump, right? Is that what you're
mhm.
saying? And that's the 30
Yes.
milligrams. Gotcha.
Yeah, and that's going to help people increase their testosterone levels. But I like, if you have low DHEA levels and low testosterone levels and just low hormone levels overall, DHEA is one of those hormones that donates to make your androgens. It makes a lot of other hormones. And so,
It can make
it's one of
estrogen.
those raw materials. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the only downside. I think it can also aromatize to estrogen.
Exactly. I didn't want to get into that because that's
Yeah.
another story.
It
But
can aromatize. Yeah.
especially if you have a lot of inflammation and a
Men.
lot, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And
men.
then that's an estradiol cream and an estriol
Oh,
cream. Yeah.
interesting. Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
I would like to say about estrogen, I do not demonize estrogen. I'm a huge fan, but I do think that I think all areas of balance should be exhausted before taking estrogen.
Yeah.
I really believe that.
Yeah.
Uh, So testing, boosting metabolism, supporting thyroid, making sure your gut and liver are functioning well to get rid of that estrogen, just in case you don't do good things with it, before adding more to the mix. And yes, estriol is the weaker estrogen, but it's also not, what you do with your estrogen is different than what the next person does. So
Mhm.
doctors always say, "Oh, we'll put you on estriol. It's the safest one and it stays localized." No, no. Maybe for you it's safe, but for me, I could take estriol and I will turn that estriol into make it go down an unhealthy pathway that grows things and causes clots. That's what my body used to do with estrogen. So it's very, very delicate for me. I think people should really approach estrogen supplementation with a lot of care and guidance and testing, frequent testing. Even in menopause. And yes, it's good for the brain and Alzheimer's, preventing Alzheimer's, all the things, but it's the balance of the two that creates those benefits. And if liver function is impaired and bowel function is impaired, that's not good.
Yeah, and you say grow things is really interesting because the hypercoagulation has come to light with IC, and the biofilms in the bladder is associated with the some of the processes that lead to hypercoagulation. And now I'm thinking estrogen is probably a big piece of that because a lot of the patients have endometriosis as well, and then they have the biofilms. And so there's probably
Mm,
something going on with high estrogen, which is growing things. And if it's growing things, then it's also growing biofilms. And those biofilms are those bacteria that we're trying to kill, right? We're trying to kill them with, biofilm disruptors and in some cases antibiotics. But then if you have the estrogen not taken care of, then you're just going to continue to have these biofilm problems. So it's like this big web that of complexity
Yeah.
all be addressed.
Yeah. The tricky part too is that estrogen can help things. And you think like when women have hot flashes, and it helps the hot flash to say, oh, I had horrible hot flashes and now I take estrogen, I'm fine. I mean, that's not, you're treating the symptom, not the cause. It helps because it works with your body temperature, and estrogen can affect that and bring temperature into balance. But it does, but that's not the source of the hot flash. The source of the hot flash is cortisol dysregulation, blood sugar dysregulation, and low progesterone. So it's tough because really estrogen is being pushed so much right now. And I just want to scream from the rooftops, just take care, be careful, like try to address the root causes before you jump into that, onto estrogen.
Wow, this was awesome. I'm really happy we did this. So this is great. And so now we also know where we can get the try out some of the progesterone. Make sure you follow the advice of Kitty and I, like take care. Don't just jump to progesterone because you think it's like the next quick fix. There's not. It's not a quick fix. There's no quick
No,
fix, but this is can be
it's the long game. Yeah. And I would like to say to give people hope that I am in menopause now. And I did a blood labs recently and a Dutch, and my levels are normal for my age. They're in range. I am not depleted in testosterone and not depleted in estrogen, not depleted in progesterone. I'm right where I need to be for my age, and hoping to get them up a little bit with all of the, with the weight training and the eating enough protein and all that. It can be done. It can be done. I do take progesterone at night because I love the way it makes me sleep. But and because it's so good for your brain. But yeah, I wouldn't need to take it,
well, you
so
look
I'm not even
great.
on.
You look
Thank you.
fabulous. And how do you feel?
Thank you. I feel fantastic. It's
Yay.
the stress. It's all about the stress. Like you
Yeah.
got to manage that stress
Yeah.
reaction for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I'm so happy. So where can people find you?
So you mentioned Healthy Gut Girl on Instagram, but it's Healthy Gut Girl underscore because there is an imposter out there. Healthy Gut Girl underscore.
Really?
Well, so she just took Healthy Gut Girl before I got a chance to. So not
Oh,
really imposter, but Healthy Gut Girl underscore. And then I have a podcast called Stuff Your Doctor Should Know. And then you can come to the estrogen dominant support group and join us on Facebook.
I
We just
will.
hit 50,000, and it's we
Yeah.
need we need we need wise voices like yours there, and all your listeners as well.
Thank you. No, I will definitely join that. Thank you so much. This is awesome. So, well,
Thanks for having me.
yeah, have a great day. Thank you.